Snapshot 25W04A brought us Datapack version 64 and Resource Pack version 49 with data-driven cat and frog variants, new item components, component predicates for item models, and more. My name is Slime and this is a showcase of all the changes. Let's start with entity variants. The way variants are defined has been unified in this version, with variants now generally having a spawn conditions field and an asset definition either as a single asset ID field or an assets object with multiple entries. Variant selection is now done the same way for all data-driven variants, with a priority and condition available for each variant. When a mob spawns, the position is used to filter all the variants based on their conditions, and then the one with the highest priority is selected, or a random one of those if there are more than one. There are 3 possible spawn conditions. Biome checks if the entity is spawning in a wanted biome. The matching biomes are specified in a biomes field, which is either a biome ID, list of biome IDs, or a hashtag biome tag. Structures checks if the entity is spawning inside a specific structure, given by a structures field, which is a structure ID, list of structure IDs, or hashtag structure tag. And finally, the moon brightness condition matches the brightness of the moon with a range given by the range field, which is either a single floating point value or a min-max object. There are now data-driven cat variants in the game, which can be modified by adding files in the cat variant registry folder. Each variant has a spawn conditions field like we just discussed, and an asset ID field which references the texture asset to use for that variant. Frog variants are now similarly data-driven through the frog variant registry with exactly the same fields. Of course, the asset ID in this case now references a frog texture. Pig variants have been unified with this format as well, where the texture field has been replaced by asset ID, and the biome field has been replaced by using the new spawn conditions instead. And wolf variants have been similarly changed to use spawn conditions, but the multiple textures of the wolf are now found inside an assets object and renamed to not use _texture suffixes. In item component news, the weapon component can disable blocking field has been replaced by disable blocking for seconds, a non-negative float which defaults to 0. If this is set to a positive value, it will disable blocking on a successful hit for the specified number of seconds. There's a new component called blocks attacks. When this is present on an item, that item can be used like a shield to block damage from attacks. The damage reduction from blocking is specified in a damage reductions field, which is a list of entries that control how much damage should be blocked in a given attack. Each entry can specify which type of damage it applies to in the type field, either as a damage type ID, list of damage type IDs, or hashtagged damage type tag. If not specified, this damage reduction entry applies to all types of damage. The amount of damage to block is specified in the 2 fields base and factor, where base specifies an absolute amount of damage to always block, and factor specifies a fraction of incoming damage to block. This factor is applied on top of the base, so a blocking item with a base of 5 and factor of 0.5 will block all incoming damage for an attack of 10 and 15 damage out of an attack of 20. The item damage field controls how the item takes damage from blocking. This is an optional object, and if not specified, a single point of durability is used up by every block. If specified, it has 3 fields. Threshold for the amount of damage that the attack needs to deal before the item takes damage, and then a base value for the amount of damage the item always takes, and a factor field for a fraction of damage depending on the attack value. The block delay seconds field is a non-negative float that determines how long time it takes to activate the block in seconds. If not specified, this defaults to 0. Disable cooldown scale is a multiplier to the time the item gets disabled when hit by a disabling attack. This defaults to 1, and if set to 0, that means the item cannot be disabled by attacks at all. Block sound specifies the ID of the sound event to use when an attack is blocked. And disabled sound specifies the ID of the sound event to use when blocking is disabled by an attack. There's a new break sound component which can be used to specify the sound that the item makes when it runs out of durability and breaks. If this is not present, no sound will be played, but by default this component is present on all items. The new provides banner pattern component can be used to make items enable certain patterns in a loom. The format is listed as a hashtag banner pattern tag, but is in reality a non-hashtag banner pattern tag. The provides trim material component makes an item provide a specified trim material when used in a trimming recipe. The trim material registry entries no longer specify items. Note that to be used in the built-in smithing recipes, your item also needs to be added to the trim material item tag. The dyed color component format now also supports specifying RGB color components in a list similar to other color fields. The hide tooltip and hide additional tooltip components, along with all the show in tooltip fields in various components, have been removed. Instead, there is a new tooltip display component. This component controls the display of tooltips with a hide tooltip boolean field that can be used to hide the tooltip entirely, and a hidden components field, which is a list of all the components to hide tooltips from. These can include all the components that previously had show in tooltip booleans, but also a number of new components that take over the roles of hide additional tooltip flags from before. The components that previously had one main field and an optional show in tooltip boolean have been reduced to their simplified form. So while you could previously choose to omit the levels field for enchantments components, that simplified form is now the only way to write that component. These tooltip changes also have effect on other formats. For loot tables, the toggle tooltips function now accepts any item component ID in the toggles map, and that component will be toggled in the tooltip display component. In recipe news, smithing recipes have been updated. The base field of transform recipes is no longer optional, and the base, template, and addition fields in trim recipes are no longer optional. These recipes now also have a pattern field specifying the trim pattern that will be applied, which means that pattern is no longer specified in the trim pattern registry. In entity and data news, the potion entity type has been split into splash potion and lingering potion. In command news, a bug has been fixed where block entity data failed to update if the new data was empty, even if the block entity had been completely removed in between in the same tick. This would mean that blocks like player heads or decorated pots could desync. The SNBT format has been expanded to accept lists of mixed types. This means you can once again have text components of mixed types in commands. The storage for the actual data will be different though, since the NBT format has not been extended, so if you're using the data command to dig out such data, you'll need to parse this format. In advancement news, the background field no longer has a textures prefix or .png suffix, and now works like other asset IDs. In particle news, the tinted leaves particles now has a color field, which is the standard RGBA format of either a packed integer or a list of 4 floats, which specifies the color instead of that being implied by the block position. In tag news, the cat variant tags default spawns and full moon spawns have been removed. The damage type tag bypasses shield has been renamed to bypasses blocking, and the entity type tag can wear horse armor has been added. The game test framework introduced in the previous snapshot had a whole lot of fixes and updates in this version. The name of several fields mismatched what the changelog said, which has been fixed in this version. The mode state property of test blocks is now called mode instead of test block mode. A number of fixes have been done to the user interface of test blocks and test instance blocks, which now have the labels aligned correctly. Tab now selects the widgets in the right order, and they no longer have blurred backgrounds. The message label no longer shows up even when the message field is not available. Test blocks can no longer be destroyed by ender dragons and withers. Running a test while inside the test structure no longer deletes the player from the server and causes an entirely messed up connection state. The result of running test pause is no longer off by 1 on the Y and Z axis. You now get a proper error message when trying to create a test which is too large or try to locate a test that doesn't exist. And you now get command feedback when using the test create command and when trying to reset a test that doesn't exist. And finally, the game test entry point for running the test in headless mode now properly loads zip datapacks and loads tests from datapacks, which means it can now be used. In resource pack news, the item model format has been updated with a new component boolean item property for the condition model type. This property checks for an item component predicate the same way they can be used for commands, but instead of using the predicate type as a key name, it is specified in the predicates field, and the predicate itself is specified in the value field. The component selection property introduced in the previous snapshot has been fixed to work with registry-based values. If the selected value comes from a registry and the current data packs don't include it, the entry will be ignored instead of the entire model breaking. And in the paletted permutation sprite source, there's a new field called separator for the string used to join texture and permutation names to produce sprite names, by default an underscore character. And that is all for these pack versions. Thank you for watching, my name is Sliced Lime, and I'll see you next time.